If you got a Bible this morning, go ahead and grab it and meet me in Matthew chapter 9. Matthew chapter 9. I'll meet you there in just a second for part 2 of a series that we've called Priora 3 that we're using to kick off the new year. And if you're just catching up on the series this week, here's the idea. We said last week, whether you call it a resolution or you call it a series of goals or you just have a general sense of things that you think about last year that you want to improve in this year before we get to next year, however you think about that kind of thing, most of us have some stuff that when the calendar turns into a new year, we think, I would love to see that be different next year. Or maybe I should say, most of us had some of those, at least until Friday. People who study these things say that a vast majority of all of our resolutions or goals make it until the second Friday of January, and then not any further than that. It actually even has a name. They call it Quitter Day. So, happy belated Quitters Day to all of you who celebrate. So good news, quitters. Doxology is a grace place. You're not going to pick up any shame from me about that, but I am curious about the quick quit. I mean, it wasn't a problem with your goal, I assume. I assume whether you called it a resolution or a goal or just a loose sense of things, that they were good things that you wanted to see change this year. Good goals that you had. But somehow, collectively as a people, something is going on with us that, one, allows people who study that kind of thing to pinpoint an expiration date on most of our goals. And two, an expiration goal that is really close to the inspiration date of our goal. So I don't know what all of that's about. I told you last week, Greg McCown wrote a really great book called Essentialism. He thinks it has to do with our tendency to set priorities, plural. He talks about how the word priorities is actually a self-contradicting word, that the word priority, singular, means the state or quality of being first. So if you've got priorities, you don't have a priority. And according to McCown, that's the problem. So whether or not he's right about why we're so prone to be quick quitters when it comes to our goals and our resolutions, I happen to believe that he's onto something. There's a corollary that seems to be the point that Matthew is making here in Matthew chapter 9. If you've got a whole bunch of priorities, you may or may not ever make progress. But if you pick the right priority, a bunch of the other things that would have been priorities tend to fall right in line behind it. We said last week, often in some of the same categories that we think of when we think of resolutions. A lot of us made resolutions out of a desire for control, to get control of or get control over some of the out of control areas of our lives. Some of us, we go to resolutions to find wholeness. How do I find the right pieces to a right life? Or how do I put the pieces back together and make them whole once they've broken? And then thirdly, purpose. How do I discover or live into the part that I'm designed to play in the world? Here in Matthew chapter 9, Jesus gives us a single priority. Follow me. And he shows us that that one priority is the only way to find control and real wholeness and true purpose to our lives that doesn't quit. So we hit on control last week. This week we're talking about finding wholeness when it feels like our life has been broken into a million pieces. That's actually one of my earliest memories. It happened to be my second birthday. And I know because my mom was going in for a planned C-section the next morning with my little brother. It was important to her that we each have our own birthdays, and it was also important to her that I have the Cookie Monster cake that I had so desperately asked for. So among other talents, my mom is an all-world cake decorator. We're talking British baking show kind of level when she wants to. And I would show you a picture of this Cookie Monster cake that she made, except it's not the best example of her skill. In fact, that's the story. That's the memory. A gigantic crash, a splat. an ugly cry, and a toddler walking in to see my very pregnant mother sitting on the kitchen floor sobbing and trying to reassemble a Cookie Monster cake from a billion blue crumbs that were scattered all over the kitchen floor. It was only my second birthday. I wasn't yet well trained in what it takes to make, much less reshape, a cake. But even in that moment, it was pretty clear to me that all the king's horses and all the king's men, and even my cake decorator mother, was not putting Cookie Monster back together again. So can I take just a little bit of a heavy turn with you, if I promise I'll bring it back to hope? Isn't the thing behind a whole lot of our resolutions, isn't a desire to reshape or to remake, to put something together again that has slipped out of our hands? To deal with old wounds, maybe to deal with current struggles, to find wholeness in an area that feels broken. Whether we experience that brokenness as just a few cracks in the foundation or a million shattered hopes and dreams scattered everywhere we look. And isn't the thing behind a quick quit for some of us a sense that the thing that's been broken isn't going to get whole in our hands, however gifted we are and however hard we try? That's where we find ourselves in Matthew 9 today. We see two stories of two different people who at first glance seem to have absolutely nothing in common, until you realize that 3 of the 4 eyewitnesses who gave us accounts of their experience with Jesus tell both of these stories together with some of the exact same detail, because they see these two stories as connected and in bigger ways than just that they happen on the same calendar day. Ultimately, what those eyewitnesses saw and what they want to show us is more than just 2 tragic, worst-case scenario kind of brokenness stories. They saw, and they want to show us, who it is they believe they were following when they made it their one priority to follow Jesus. And not to bury the lead, here's what they saw, and they want you and I to know. There is nothing too broken for Jesus to fix. There is nothing too broken for Jesus to fix. Let's pick up the story. Jesus invites Matthew to follow him right back to Matthew's house with some of Matthew's rowdy friends. The Pharisees don't love, and they don't love the fact that Jesus is there with Matthew and his rowdy friends. But Jesus says, "This is why I've come." And right in the middle of that conversation, look at Matthew chapter 9, verse 18. While he was saying this, a synagogue leader came and knelt before him and said, "My daughter has just died, but come and put your hand on her and she will live." Jesus got up and went with him, and so did his disciples. Just then, a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. She said to herself, "If I only touch his cloak, I will be healed." And Jesus turned and saw her. "Take heart, daughter," he said. "Your faith has healed you." And the woman was healed at that moment. When Jesus entered the synagogue leader's house, he saw the noisy crowd and people playing pipes. He said, "Go away. The girl is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After the crowd had been put outside, he went in, took the girl by the hand, and she got up. News of this spread through all that region. So think about what you have here. A man comes to Jesus. He says, "My daughter has just died." And actually, the other 2 accounts tell us that he got that news there in the presence of Jesus. He left her bedside as she was dying to go find Jesus, and there while he's standing in front of Jesus, he receives the news that she's died. The other 2 accounts also tell us this little girl's age, which was 12 years old. That's actually an important detail that adds information to the story, but it's also an important personal detail for me. See, I've got a daughter who's 12 years old. And I'm not a synagogue leader, but I know a couple. Actually, Rabbi Zimmerman and I have become friends over the years. We talk a lot, and the truth is we have some fundamental theological differences, but we also have a whole lot of stuff in common. Theologically, but also really practically when it comes to what it looks like to do our jobs. Let me just tell you, all of that together means it takes a few less interpretive steps for me coming to this story than it might even take for some of you. But let me tell you something about this dad, as a dad of a 12-year-old who's a leader in a congregation. One of the great privileges of my job is that I know a bunch of you, which means that when I've got a problem, even a really big problem, I can pick up the phone and I can call one of you. You guys are awesome. And you know some really awesome people, literally all over the world. So here's what I know beyond a shadow of a doubt about Jairus, who has left the bedside of his dying daughter to seek help from a traveling teacher who his people are presently trying to cancel, and who is at this moment that the story takes place in the home of people that Jairus would have considered unclean. Jairus is a dad who is completely out of options. Look, if a doctor existed in the world who could have helped his little girl, she would have been helped by this moment. If a religious ritual could have fixed her brokenness, it would have been fixed in this moment. Look, this is a dad. If duct tape could have put his daughter back together, if anything within the realm of normal operation could have fixed what was broken, normal operation would have fixed what was shattering into a million pieces for this dad. And this girl would have already been well. What does he show us by showing up here in front of Jesus? Like, he doesn't care about social pressure. He doesn't care about prestige or blowback from the religious establishment anymore. This dad didn't have the resources to deal with the brokenness he was dealing with. And look, some of you have been in this exact parent-child scenario. And I don't want to camp out there for a few different reasons, but all of us can agree, whether we've been in this moment or not, when it comes to brokenness, Jairus, he's living in worst nightmare kind of territory that we pray to God we would never experience. And we wouldn't compare our brokenness to his, but all of us have had the experience of dealing with something that's broken that we don't have the resources and we don't have the relationships to put back together. And some of us haven't had it in the past. For some of us, that's a present tense reality this morning. So here's the question that Matthew's inviting you to ask. Why consider Jesus when it comes to what's broken beyond repair in your life? Why consider Jesus at all? Well, number one reason that Matthew gives us here is Jesus is available to you. Jesus is available to you. Look back there at verse 19. It says, Jesus, here's the news, and he got up and went with him, and so did his disciples. I hope you recognize those words, got up, from last week. Remember, the paralyzed man got up in verses 1-8, and then Matthew got up to get unstuck and follow Jesus. Notice what Matthew has discovered and is pointing out to you so that you don't ever lose sight of it. The message of Jesus is not of a God who sits in some faraway heaven where he can stay completely removed from the brokenness and the pain and the shattered hopes and dreams of your life, saying, get up and follow me if you can find me. This is a God who gets up and comes near to you. This is a God who is near to the brokenhearted, who is available to you individually. Jesus doesn't say, notice, Jairus, man, I don't know if you've noticed, I got a lot going on here. Like, I'm starting a movement here. Like, there are a lot of people to take care of. There's a whole crowd of people. In fact, the crowd's going to become part of the story next week. Jairus, you haven't exactly been on my team up until this point. In fact, you've been a part of the opposition. So take a number. Like, remain on the line. Spent a few hours last week on hold waiting to talk to a customer service representative, listening to bad music on repeat that was only interrupted every once in a while by a person saying, your call is very important to us, which it most certainly was not. That's not the posture of heaven towards you. Look, you are not on hold with heaven, even if you're waiting. And Matthew wants you to know that. Jesus dropped everything to go be with Jairus. He wasn't too busy. He wasn't distracted. He wasn't concerned with the crowds. He was concerned about Jairus. That tells us something about Jesus. He's not just concerned with the brokenness of the world in general. He's not just concerned with the brokenness of the people who have built up a lot of religious credit with him where he feels like he owes them a favor. He's concerned with the individual brokenness of your life. And he will get up and come be with you in the middle of it. Jesus is always available to you. And just in case Jairus' story is not enough to prove that, there's another story right in the middle of his story. Jesus got up to go with Jairus. Matthew tells us, verse 20, just then, a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. She said to herself, if I only touch his cloak, I will be healed. So you don't want to use your imagination too much here about what this woman is struggling with. Matthew shows us some discretion, but it's important for you to know it's not just a skin knee that won't stop bleeding for her. This is the kind of bleeding that would have given her a reputation. This is the kind of bleeding that people would have believed that she deserved, that she might have even believed she deserved. It's the kind of bleeding that made her ceremonially unclean. She wasn't a synagogue leader. She wouldn't have even been welcome inside the synagogue. Not only that, nobody could have touched her. Nobody could have hugged her. Not a friend, not a sibling, not a husband, and not even a father. This is a girl who is absolutely alone in the world. Just like Jairus' daughter, this woman's totally out of options. But unlike Jairus' daughter, she doesn't have a daddy fighting for her. She is totally, completely alone. Some of you can relate to that woman too, can't you? I mean, you know that feeling of aloneness. The brokenness that's way more than something with your body. You've felt untouchable. You felt unclean, unwanted, alone. It's visceral for you. So notice something about this story. I told you Mark and Luke all tell us that Jairus' daughter was how old? 12. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all tell us how long this woman has been suffering. How long? 12 years. The people who knew Jesus best want you to see that the stories are connected. They're part of the same story, and here's why that matters, especially for some of us who can relate to this unloved, lonely woman who interrupts Jesus and Jairus. Remember what Jesus calls her? See it in verse 22? Jesus turned and saw her and said, "Take heart, daughter." That's not just something Jesus throws around. It's not something he says to all the girls in Galilee. In fact, none of the other four Gospels record Jesus calling a woman this. And it's not just some generic word that can mean a lot of things. You know, it could mean lady, it could mean woman, it could mean daughter. It's a really specific word that Jesus is using, and he means exactly what he says. Jesus is making a point to this woman who feels all alone in the world, like she doesn't have anyone who loves her, anyone who will fight for her, even like this other girl's dad. Jesus says, daughter, yes, you do. Jesus sees a woman that society would have discarded. Jesus sees a woman that some of us would have discarded, and he calls her daughter. He's saying what Jairus is for his sweetheart baby girl, I'm willing to be for you. See, not only is Jesus available to you, he's also affectionate toward you. Jesus isn't just willing to deal with you, obligated to put up with you somehow. He's not disgusted by you. He's not annoyed with you asking him or reaching out to where he is. His posture towards you is the posture of a perfect father towards a suffering child. That's what Matthew and also Mark and Luke want you to know about the Jesus they made it their priority to follow. But then finally, it's not just that he will, it's not just that he wants to, it's that he can. That's important to both broken people in this story, isn't it? I mean, you just have to imagine they've searched lots of places for people who are willing, people who are available, and none of them could. But Jesus is able to restore you. Verse 22, Jesus tells this broken woman, you trusted the right person. And the eyewitnesses say, verse 22, the woman was healed at that moment. And then Jesus and his disciples walk with Jairus right into the middle of a funeral. In ancient Israel, they couldn't embalm a body, so the funeral started immediately on death. They didn't wait even for the dad to show up. Verse 23, when Jesus entered the synagogue leader's house and saw the noisy crowd and the people playing pipes, he said, go away, the girl is not dead, but asleep. And they laughed at him. Why'd they laugh? Because Jesus says, the girl is not dead, but asleep. And the girl is what? Dead, not asleep. Okay, this is like Monty Python and the Dead Parrot, if you're familiar with that skit. If you're not familiar with that skit, do yourself a favor and watch it on YouTube this afternoon. The clothes don't hold up, but the comedy does. It's good, okay? So stay with me. This girl's body has stopped functioning. Her heart has stopped beating. Her lungs have stopped breathing. She is medically, physically, obviously what? Dead. Jesus says, nope, she's taken a nap. Then he sends them outside and he walks into a room and he takes this little girl by the hand and he says, Talitha cum. Sweetheart baby girl, it's time to get up. What does it say happened? She got up. Oh, how many times Jairus must have wanted to do that. But he couldn't. He wasn't able. Jesus is. Jesus is God in human flesh. He has authority over life and death and by default everything in between. He is able to deal with the broken pieces of your life as an available, affectionate, and all-able God, whatever those broken pieces are, even when they seem eternally beyond repair. Look, Matthew, Mark, Luke, they wrote down these eyewitness accounts so that you could see clearly the Jesus that they followed and you could trust in his promise too, which is not, don't miss this, that Jesus will immediately and permanently fix all of your temporary problems if you'll only just trust him enough. He can do that. Sometimes he does do that. But even when he does do that, those are only signs that point to a bigger and better promise. It's true in this story. Don't miss this. Think about that 12-year-old little girl. Have you ever met her? Have you seen her on TV? You haven't. Why? Because one day her body stopped functioning again. One day there was another funeral. And that time she didn't wake up. Not to be graphic, the woman in the middle of the story, she had her health fully and completely restored, which means there was another day when she bled again. Jesus was available, affectionate, able to heal those areas of brokenness. But Matthew and Mark and Luke don't just see those isolated stories separate from their stories or the ultimate promise of even those stories. You can tell from the way that Matthew told them. He saw their stories, his story, as a sign that points to and through your story and mine towards an even bigger hope than just temporary healing from whatever your worst shattered moments in your story is. Now think back to what Jesus said about this 12-year-old in Jairus' worst nightmare story, because I think Jesus wasn't making a joke. In fact, he had this tendency to do this when he talked about people's body that stopped working. When you and I think about death, we think about the cessation of bodily functions. When Jesus thinks about death, he thinks about something much bigger. He thinks about separation from the life giver, separation from the life sustainer, separation from the life restorer, separation from the life resurrector. See, Jesus believed, apart from him, all of us are in the exact same eternal situation as these girls were physically. Dying, broken people in a land of broken people separated from God who can't help ourselves. Dying, bleeding out with no way to stop it. And his ultimate promise isn't just temporary healing that makes the problem go away. It's not just temporary healing that masks a deeper problem. It's life that's truly life. As you trust him, you'll follow him through a broken world where lives get broken and hearts get broken, often in painful and horrifying ways. He should know it happened to him. Jesus bled. He was forsaken. He was abandoned. He was unclean and alone. His physical body stopped working, and he was spiritually separated from the life giver and the life sustainer, and the life restorer, so that you and I would never have to face that death. Jesus died so that you wouldn't. So that when your body stops functioning, it would amount to nothing more permanent than a good nap. And then 3 days later, he got up. And he didn't run away. He didn't abandon the cause of you because of what people like you have done to him. He got up and came near. He's made himself available with all affection to invite you to follow him despite whatever brokenness you see or experience around you, with a promise that in him it will not be permanent. To quote Tolkien, sad things will all come untrue. To quote Jesus, I am making all things new. There is nothing so broken that Jesus can't fix it, that he can't restore it. Matthew wants you to know, however broken your situation, however shattered your dreams, this is in the business of bringing life out of death, and wholeness out of brokenness, and renewal out of your deepest despair. And the invitation to you this morning individually is, friend, daughter, son, get up. Would you bow your head with me? It's possible this morning you relate to that little girl, and maybe you didn't even know it. Like you grew up in a religious environment. You had a great parent or parents. The truth is, at some point in your life, that's just not enough. You need an everlasting Father to come to your aid. And Jesus offers you that exact hope. The same hope he offers all of us. And this morning, he might be whispering in your ear, it's time to trust me. It's time to get up. Maybe you relate to the woman that was bleeding. You feel all alone. Maybe it's the product of decisions that you made. Maybe it's product of stuff that's outside of your control, but you feel dirty and unloved and abandoned, worthless, forgotten, hopeless. Part of you wonders if you'd even really be welcome in a place like this, or if you would be if people knew. You think your dad didn't want you, your mom didn't want you, your husband or wife didn't want you. Why would anybody? And Jesus says, are you kidding? You're why I've come. Jesus wants to call you daughter or son. And the promise of John chapter 1 is to all who believed in him, to them he gave the right to be called children of God. And you can do that right where you sit today. It's as simple as telling him, Jesus, I believe that you got up and came towards me. You took the worst this world had to offer. You died, and then you rose from the dead to give me life. And I'm receiving that gift right now. Lord, for those who are receiving the gift of life and adoption into your family this morning, for some of us who received it a long time ago, but we're coming back to the message because we've just forgotten to believe that it's true. You're a God who's available to us. Thank you. You're a God who is able to heal what's broken in us and to do it with all the affection of a Father who loves us. Today, Lord, we want our next step of following you to be our one priority, and we want to run towards it with everything we have, even in this moment as we worship. In Jesus' name, amen.
Church, would you stand with us as we respond in worship?
I've carried a burden for too long on my own.
Hey, thanks for watching. If something you heard resonated with you today, we would love to connect with you. Visit doxology.church/connect or leave a comment below. And if you enjoyed today's message and you want to see more, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new videos.